anything. That's what
Oh,
it says.
sorry.
So now,
Do you have your sound
no, I
on?
just turned on the
Oh,
microphone.
okay.
I just turned on the microphone. And that's screen sharing. That's sound
Now
sharing.
she can hear. Great.
Yes, okay, good. And that's the,
Yay, here
it's
is
a
everybody
picture.
coming. Everybody's coming to the class. Good to see everybody.
Ooh, sound, Alfie and Thomas. Cool.
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
14 live out of 41 total registered. This is so cool. And I am like no
It's
sound,
3:00.
no sound, caught in a loop. So if you're caught in a loop, try restarting.
Yeah, just refresh even your page.
Yeah, why don't you write that?
Yeah.
Hello, everybody.
All right, so it is 3:00, so we should begin, no?
Yes, we're back.
Hi, everybody.
Yeah, some of you weren't able to be here on Sunday because we said everything was going to happen on Saturday, but life gets in the way.
A lot of you were here, however, on Sunday. Hope you had a chance to watch that tape of last week's class, and welcome to this week's class. Last week, of course, we talked to and Mark Carey. Wow.
Yes, we talked to Mike Carey.
Wow, that sounds interesting. So if you missed that, you really need to go. He wrote The Girl with All the Gifts, which was a very popular book, but the film adaptation is streaming.
It's
now.
wonderful.
Really one of the best zombie movies movies I've ever seen. Best zombie. So this week, I'll just run down what we're going to talk about in the overall class, and then we'll do our usual thing where we bring you up to speed on what we've been doing. But this week, we are talking about Nalo Hopkinson's story, Greedy Choke Puppy. We will do that toward the end of our lecture to lead into our interview with author Nalo Hopkinson, that I'm very excited about. First, however, we're going to talk about Beyonce a little bit and her Grammy performance in particular and why so many people have been struck by that. And if you don't feel it, feel free to mention that in the comments too. I know Beyonce is a little much for some people, but I have a lot of admiration for the visual work that she's doing to accompany her music. And then also the movie Eve's Bayou, written and directed by Cassie Lemons. So that'll be great. But first,
who frankly is on our short list of directors that we'd like for our TV pilot.
Oh, we would love to work with her. She just directed an episode of Shots Fired. So I know she's working, and I know she's working at the network. So we'll see.
So let's see what's going on. In the Afro Future, we went to go see Guardians of the Galaxy yesterday, which was enormous fun.
It's ridiculous.
Yes, it's Marvel Comics or Star Wars by way of Mad Magazine.
Yeah.
But it has enough heart that it actually does work.
No spoilers.
No spoilers.
I'm sure ridiculous isn't a spoiler, but just in case you've forgotten how ridiculous the first one is, this one is also ridiculous.
Yes, it's totally ridiculous. Let's see. So what's going on this week? Tananarive and I'm working on the Niven Pornell collaboration. Right now I've printed out the last 100 pages. I figured that if I can get the last 100 pages as close to perfect as possible, that it will be a benchmark for the rest of the book. That means that all the characters, the fates of all the characters, all the different thematic threads, all the different plot elements, everything has to come together and make that work. If the last 100 pages of the book really, really work, I mean, the thing that you want at the end of one of the things that you want to think about with a project is how do you want people to feel when they close the book?
Oh, sure, absolutely.
When they walk out of the theater. So the end of it is the message, the way everything comes together. That is where, the emotions have to pay off, the puzzles have to be answered. Whatever the core feeling, message, thematic, whatever, that has to happen because of everything that comes together at the end.
Right.
So everything up to that is interesting, but it's like the last round of the fight, is the one that will tell the tale if there's a knockout. You want it to be a knockout, right?
Yes.
You don't want to win on points. Okay. So So I'm working on that, and I find that when I'm working on paper, I can see different things than if I'm working on the screen, working on it. And I see different things on my desktop than I do on my laptop, and different things there than I do on an iPad. So I find that every time I look at a story in a different form, different things were different things reveal themselves. So that's part of what I'm. Now, what's the other thing that we've got going on?
Well, we're waiting for notes from the producer who read our latest draft of our pilot script before we send it on to the network again. This will be the second time we've sent it. And it's interesting, when Steve and I collaborate, we are in sort of a shared world, of course. And I'm getting a little antsy to go back to that shared world. So there's an anthology coming up for a horror story. And I could write a story by myself. And Steve will tell you, I don't often say, hey, let's collaborate on a short story, do I? I don't say it that often.
Hardly ever.
No.
She hates me.
No, it's
I
not
know
that.
this. I know it's true.
I love collaborating on screenplays.
Harlan thinks she's a better writer than I am, and she agrees. So.
I prefer to write prose alone. That is true. That is true. But short stories are fun. We wrote Danger Word. That was our first collaboration. So I'm figuring, let's do something set in the world of our series where we can still sort of play in that shared world of the series while we wait for the notes from the producer. We have all kinds of novelization and rights and all that kind of stuff, so we have no danger. Even if the series got picked up, it wouldn't matter if we were writing fiction based in that world. So that's good. And we're just, what we do at the very beginning, Steve's favorite thing is, let's just write everything we know about the story. I'm not going to talk about it. We haven't written enough yet. I really have a strict rule about not talking about projects that I'm not literally writing.
And frankly, I kind of tend to agree with her about that. Even though I violate that, I think it's a better idea. It keeps the energy bottled up.
Yeah, I could get so excited telling you all what we're working on that we don't feel like working on it later. That's real.
Or you might get the feeling that you've already done it.
You've already done it. Like I've already said that, all that. So I won't tell you the ins and outs of it, but it's just like write everything we know about the world. So we're starting with a Google Doc.
So you can start with a Google Doc, and she sent me a link to that doc, and she had put in there everything that she knew about it. Then I put everything that I can think of that is either the interstitial material or important things. The question of where the story starts, I like to have a sense of what the end of the story is.
Right.
To know what I'm writing up to, because that tells me what's the punch. I want it to have some particular punch. So then I know some things about what kind of people are necessary. What is the situation? What's the time frame? And I like to have Aristotle's unity of 24 hours is great. Mm-hmm. If the entire story can take place in 24 hours, that's perfect. I violate that all the time. But man, is that great.
I like to write compact timelines.
Yes. Yeah. And we want this to be short and sharp and a nasty little piece because it's a horror anthology, which means if you have a story, life goes up and down. So clearly a story that has an up ending, a very optimistic story, ends on one of the ups. It's like, not Shakespeare, but it said that, a comedy ends at a wedding and a tragedy ends on a funeral.
Right.
Okay. So a horror ends with a funeral and something crawls out of the grave. It comes to your wedding.
And I don't know, we might have mentioned this last time, but the original short story, Danger Word, had a much darker ending.
Yes, it did.
In the film, let's just say it, completely different. I mean, we didn't actually say Grandpa Joe ate the kid, but it was as close as you could come to saying that without lunchtime. Because in fact, the story, the actual danger word was breakfast. So that was literally the last line of the story. Breakfast. It's like, crap, he's about to eat the kid. So anyway, so we tend to go dark, but that doesn't work in film sometimes.
In horror, if it's going to be a horror short story, it's probably going to start kind of up and then go down. I mean, a really, really nasty story will start down and go further down. But I think I think we have something to set up where it'll start fairly light. Yeah. And then it will just get worse and worse and worse. They're not going to be,
it'll take a
minute. We don't have time for a lot of cycles of up and down. No. So it'll probably just descend. I mean, I would argue for at least one cycle of up because we want the reader to share the false hope that all will be well. Well, all is not going to be well. It's going to be bad, and then it's going to get worse, and then it's going to get worse than that. Right. So it'll make people squeal. And you can do that. I would never do that in a book or in a movie. I just wouldn't, because I feel that if you've got people for more than an hour or so, you owe them to leave their emotions unshattered. Yeah, but there are other writers who will do short story different.
It's kind of fun. You can do that.
Yes, you can be nasty.
Why don't you pull up the Prezi, my dear?
Okay, I'll pull up the Prezi.
We will start.
And we're testing. By the way, we're testing this new software. So if we don't get things absolutely perfect,
it'll be fine.
It'll be fine.
I believe.
Okay, so
I believe in you, darling.
We're going to do this.
And you make that full screen.
Yeah, go on the screen so we can see what we're doing.
Okay. So in any case, we are moving this week to the topic of magical realism. We'd already sort of delved into magical realism a little bit with Bree Newsom's short film Wake. This week we're talking about Eve's Bayou and the work of Nalo Hopkinson, Greedy Choke Puppy. We're still waiting for it to come up on my screen. There's a delay between what we see and what you see. So it looks great on my screen, but Steve's screen, but it hasn't come up on the viewer screen yet. But in any case, so the first thing is Beyonce. It doesn't seem to be screen sharing. Anyway, I have a gorgeous picture of Beyonce up on the screen.
Let's try this again. Let's see whether or not, let's make sure in the live broadcast it says turn screen share on. Okay.
Oh, don't end call.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Your entire screen, share. There.
That was probably a close call for getting rid of the whole webinar.
It could be.
All right, so here's Beyonce. Not everyone is a huge fan, and some of you are huge fans. The reason we're looking at this Grammy performance in particular is because it is so full of magic and homage to deities. It's so much a visualization of not only femininity and womanhood, but also motherhood, which to me, what speaks more to the future than a woman pregnant with twins standing on stage doing this highly staged, of course, but very, very well conceived performance at the Grammys. We recently interviewed Adrienne Marie Brown for a future webinar or bonus material for your class. She's a beautiful Afrofuturist herself. And in fact, she has a book right now out called Emergent Strategy, which she wrote out of her experience teaching Octavia's methods and from her work. But in any case, Adrienne wrote a piece about the Grammy performance. She called it a gilded Afrofuturist dream. And what she says, I think, is interesting. And granted, she's a huge Beyonce fan, okay? So she's coming from that direction. She says, to me, Beyonce is an invitation for Black people to see our miraculous nature in this moment when Black lives in particular, and all that lives on our planet, are in a precarious position due to the theater of racism, fascism, and patriarchy spreading across the globe. She embodies our continuation, the Black bodies that birth us. And I think that is very well put. She goes on to talk about visually. I hope you had a chance to watch this video. I don't put copyrighted material in this broadcast because we don't want to have to deal with copyrighted material when we redistribute this broadcast. But she has intersections of Christianity and Yoruba. Christianity, I would say that depiction of what very much looked like the Last Supper, where her chair tilts back. And Yoruba, a religion with roots in West Africa and lineage throughout the Caribbean, South America, and the U.S., which asserts children of the diaspora as beings with a destiny interconnected to the planet. And that, to me, is kind of the joy and beauty of Beyonce in that performance. Of course, she's quoting the poetry of 27-year-old rising star Warsan Shire. I hope I'm pronouncing her name right. Correct me if I'm not. Warsan, W-A-R-S-A-N, Shire, S-H-I-R-E. A lot of the moments that made me gasp when I first heard Lemonade were those lines of poetry, you know? So yes, we need to give her credit. And even in, of course, the Lemonade visual album that she put out, which helped inspire some of the images in this Grammy performance, that was also inspired by the great magical realism cult classic Daughters of the Dust by director Julie Dash. So there's this sense of lineage and continuity and royalty. We had a little conversation on the Facebook page about royalty and queenliness and what that means and what she's trying to project. So yeah, I want to in fact take a look at the comments to see if anybody had any thoughts about Beyonce. We had a nice lively conversation going on the Facebook page. Yeah, and I agree with Rory. She's saying that it felt like a performance and a ceremony. It's true. If something had been conjured at a certain point, no one would have been surprised by that.
Yeah, no, I'm going to get the entire picture.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
Okay, it's okay.
Okay, got it. So, So yeah, that I'm going to look at my notes and see if there was anything else I wanted to say about Beyonce before we moved on to Eve's Bayou. Just basically that she picked up on. Let me see. That's from Adrian. So yeah, I mean, we've talked about a lot of these other Afrofuturists, Sun Ra, Janelle Monáe, in their time, sort of showing us that what can be this image of goddess, priestess, Madonna, all those things that sometimes we are afraid to claim for ourselves as Black women. So I think that's one thing that's important. And also notice that all of the artists that we are discussing today are women. So women are taking prominence in the magical realism segment of our course. So really, I guess today's course is in part sort of a celebration of women, but also our complexities, and the works that we're discussing, Eve's Bayou and Greedy Choke Puppy, the short story we asked you to read, are not, simple homage to womanhood and femininity. There's a little more complication to it than that. So honey, let's get back to our faces, if you could do that.
Oh, no problem.
And then we'll talk about Eve's Bayou. Oh, yeah, Eve's Bayou. So Eve's Bayou, year actually in Afrofuturism. That was the year of the Clark Atlanta University Conference where we first met, and where I first met Octavia and Chip Delaney. So it was really a magical time, no pun intended, with all these forces coming together. It was a year when Black genre artists were feeling their strength in numbers, which was a great feeling. Their audience was growing, awareness was shifting. And I first saw Eve's Bayou, of course, in the theater, and it left me a bit queasy. So my first is an apology for anybody who was triggered in watching this film. If you haven't seen it, it's almost maybe better to hear sort of what it's about going in. But
well, so what you have?
I mean, it's a coming of age story about a young girl played by a very young Journey Smollett, who now stars on Underground, ironically, who plays a child named Eve, who basically witnesses her father's infidelity, and there's sort of very uncomfortable sexual energy running through this household because there's been a rupture in the family on that level. He has two daughters who respond in different ways to this rupture. And at worst, it's a story about potential incest and murder, if you believe that magic can cause someone to die. Or at best, it's a story about a young girl's loss of innocence and wishing she could murder through magic. And a father who put himself in such an ambiguous position with his daughter that it's incest however you slice it, but it would be the difference between whether the father tried to kiss the older daughter or the older daughter tried to kiss the father. And there are two versions of the story, each very disturbing, each tears the family apart, but for slightly different reasons.
And they don't actually resolve which one it is. So she uses the magic to see what happened, but they don't tell the audience.
Right. Right. And there's a letter Samuel L. Jackson's character writes at the end, which would seem to explain everything. But
from his point of view.
What's he supposed to say?
Right.
I mean, I guess when I first saw it, I was just like, I can't believe he did that.
Right.
And I was so mad. I didn't watch it again for probably more than a decade.
But I think that Cassie Lemons is by denying you the understanding of what exactly happened, she allows you to put yourself in there and ask questions about what's going on here. I mean, very clearly, he'd set himself up for disaster. This is a man who used his sexuality in a manipulative way, betraying his wife, having sex with other women who he's serving them as a physician,
right,
and also having sex with them.
Right.
And it creates a situation where it is believable that his daughter might be torn enough to feel like the way you get this man's attention, her father's attention, is by having sex with him. If this is the rule, then this is what I will do in order to get this attention. That is about as sick as something can get. He has set up a situation, no matter which way you look at, whether he did that to her, or whether she came on to him, he absolutely violated the contract between father and daughter.
Right.
There's no question about that. I mean, and it's a difficult thing. I think that Casey Lemons has undoubtedly known women. You know, if she has not had this experience in her own life, has not had problems firsthand, she has observed it firsthand, where that violation of the boundaries creates a problem that goes for generations.
Yes, intergenerational, and that ties into the short story, which we'll discuss later.
Yes.
But this idea of an intergenerational plague, an intergenerational curse, was part of what fueled me to write The Good House, and how those things that go unaddressed, that we do not discuss with our families and our children, still resonate because of perhaps the silence, rather in spite of the silence. Now, in terms of Samuel L. Jackson, what a coup it was to get him not only to star in this film, but also he was one of the producers. And he was riding high after Pulp Fiction and had recently headlined his own action thriller, The Last Kiss Goodnight, which Steve could do a separate webinar on, but we won't get into that now. Okay, I will say, there's no kiss in the movie.
Oh, yes, there is. Yes, there is.
Well, he doesn't get a kiss.
Yes, he does. But it's, in the original, if we wanted to
all right,
I read, just for a second, we're talking about women's power.
The Last Kiss
Goodnight. So let's talk for just a moment about The Last Kiss Goodnight, because I happen to know that when that script was sold, it sold for more money than any script in the history of Hollywood, because Shane Black, who had written Lethal Weapon, had cracked the code on how to make a female action hero. And that if you take a look at the action suites in that movie, the first action scene takes place in her kitchen. Using kitchen implements. She's fighting to save her daughter. There's no ego involved here. She's not tough. She's absolutely deadly. There's a great scene where she's racing to save someone, and she's on ice skates, and she shoots the people in this car. The car goes off into the lake, and she jumps up and pirouettes over the hood of the car, firing as she goes. That's what's described in the script. So they used very female images of beauty combined with violence in order to create a bridge for the audience to believe in this woman. Now, the original script, the title, The Long Kiss Goodnight, refers to the fact that there's a point at which this secret agent thinks that she's going to be killed. And she tells the private investigator who's been helping her, this is the last time I'm ever going to be pretty. And she kisses him and they make love. Now, when they cast Samuel L. Jackson in that role, that became problematic. Because I was sitting in the theater when the movie first came out. And during the scenes that they were together, the audience, rather than being kind of eager with anticipation for two beautiful people to have a love scene, they were very clearly going, oh, God, they did not want to see Gina Davis and Samuel L. Jackson. I mean, it was very clear.
Even in 1997.
Yes, there was.
I mean, even with 5.
There was tension in the theater rather than pleasurable anticipation.
But you had to know the minute they cast Samuel L. Jackson, that wasn't going to be a love story, right?
Not necessarily. I mean, because if they knew that, you got the title, and if they cast a white guy, same title, same advertising, you would have thought they're going to end up coupled up. Now they don't end up together. So he actually but the other thing is interesting is that character dies in the movie. So I'm not sure which way I would have wanted it. If you shot it the original way, I would have said, oh, right. So, he gets it on with the white woman, but then he has to die. On the other hand, I can also grouse, well, he didn't get it on with the white woman. So it's really a tricky thing. And it's one of those odd little cultural moments, which would have been the better thing to do. The movie works much better now that people have seen it once and they know it doesn't happen. You can just enjoy it as a buddy movie for all practical purposes. Right. So the tension is gone. But it's very clear that these are the kinds of things that the games that women have had to play in order to position themselves to be able to do the kinds of action things that the guys do. So now they can get the big budgets. They get the big box office. Go ahead.
It dawns on me that Samuel L. Jackson may be more of a lover in Eve's Bayou than in any other movie I've seen. I cannot think of anything.
Only other movie I can think of where he ever had a love scene was in The Caveman's Valentine, where he plays a homeless man.
Right. And it's not explicit, and I'm not counting the scene with the young girl, but he's in the beginning of the movie. He's having sex out in the outbuilding. He's clearly being sexual with. But
it's not as bad as poor Morgan Freeman, who literally has not had so much as a kiss in his entire screen career. So it's very clear that there are things that are happening here. And if you're going to be making movies and you want to take a look at movies, you want to see how movies relate to social mores and changing social mores, watch this stuff and take a look. And much will be revealed. Now, what I thought with Eve's Bayou is they took the energy, intergenerational energy of abuse and fear and black men and women having been put at each other's throats due to centuries of being unable to fulfill their natural, healthy roles, and personalized it down to a single family's tragedy. These two girls trying to find their way, moving between being girls and being women. I think Eve has her first period, if I'm not mistaken.
The older sister.
The older sister has her first period. And, what does it mean to be a woman? What does it mean to be an adult? So you have a lot of really wonderful things. Remember I said a long time ago that there are only two things that for an artist to write about, who am I and what is true? What are human beings and what is the world? So you can look at what are relationships? What are relationships between black men and women? What is it to become an adult? What is it to be a child? What is the proper use of sexual energy? What are the proper roles of mother and father and daughter? What is the proper role of a doctor in his community? There are all sorts of violations in there. What is the relationship between two sisters?
Yes.
So there are all these different things that you could play with. And once you've got your first draft, you get to sit back and ask yourself questions. What do you think about these different things? And then you strengthen and you play with those relationships and those balances to create the kind of power that you want in your work. But get through your first draft. That's what's critically important. Don't try to figure all this stuff out before, while you're writing, or you'll just bog yourself down.
Cassie Lemons had written with other people before, but Eve's Bayou was her first solo script. And as a solo script, it's excellent.
Yes.
If you had a chance to watch it, there's a lot of poetry in the dialogue. The cinematography is outstanding. So you really have the juxtaposition of the elements of the film that make us queasy set against beautiful landscapes and these mangroves and southern, hearkening back to a southern segregated city. You might notice that this is not like some of our other works, and neither is Nalo's story about the opposition of black and white. They're from self-contained cultures. In Nalo's case, it's set in the Caribbean. And in the case of Eve's Bayou, it is set in Louisiana in a very I don't want to use the word segregated. It's like a self-sustaining black town, pre-integration, let's call it. But the kind of place you can imagine would still look very much the same 20 years later, despite any changes in laws and whatnot. It's an entirely black community. It's that kind of black community that often people will talk about, where the doctor lives next door to the beggar, so that children growing up in the community see a whole cross section of future possibilities in life. One of the characters is teaching at the university. Samuel L. Jackson's character is a physician. And then you have other strata, you have the woman who's on the dock, Diane Carroll's character, who does the psychic readings with the paint on her face. She's the sort of the stereotypical old voodoo woman, although she may also have a gift, but she's sort of dolled herself up like some people might say like a sideshow freak. It's certainly, I think that Aunt Moselle would think of her that way. And actually the reason Cassie Lemons wrote this was because she was trying to write a part for herself. This is something we've learned in dealing with black actors in Hollywood. Their biggest problem is a lack of scripts. So she really wanted to play the part of Aunt Moselle, the psychic. It would like be an older version of herself, and she was actually a little bit too young to play that part at the time, and she ended up directing it. She ended up not even starring in the film at all. But that was her creative inspiration, was to write herself a part. So she was seeing herself as sort of the observer. She's outside of this family dynamic that Eve and her sister and her mother are going through. She has her own problems. She's a widow. She has outlived several husbands. With Samuel L. Jackson's character being such a negative influence on the film, she almost then has an obligation to have counterbalancing images of men. Now, a lot of them are dead, but there's a beautiful scene in the movie where she talks about how she loved all her husbands, and how she loved them all. And she does have another male suitor who appears in the story. Again, very kind, counterbalancing image. And she's fearful, obviously, of attachment. She feels like she's damned to always outlive everyone she loves. So that's a separate whole thing going on with this one character. But she's observing, she's witnessing what's happening with Eve and this family, and the disintegration of the family. Did someone have a comment?
I was coming. I addressed them.
Oh, okay, great. So what else do I want to say about Eve's Bayou? Let me just refer to my notes. The kiss, we got all that. It's not about an opposition to white supremacy. Now the question is racism an underlying contributor to the dysfunction in the story in some way that isn't made clear on the screen? I can't speak to that, but that's always a possibility.
Yeah, I would say that Black people have to take responsibility for the amount of dysfunction in their communities. It is equal to the amount of dysfunction in white communities. The amount of dysfunction that is higher than that, on the other hand, I think is reasonable to consider the result of intergenerational racism. There is abuse and incest and power issues in Black communities and white communities. So I think that it would be passing the buck to say this is about what white people did to us. This is about the way Black
communities
people, the way communities are negotiating their relationships, dealing with their problems. It really is about what it is to be a human being more than what it is to be a Black human being in the Black versus white sense. It is possible to look at it politically, but I think that you're missing the point. It's a cheat. I think it's much better to look at it emotionally, psychologically, philosophically, just in terms of how do men and women, how do human beings navigate their lives? How do we navigate relationships?
Yeah. And in terms of the magic is subtle in this story. There are characters who believe they have a touch of psychic energy. It's up to sort of us as the viewers to decide how much we believe that they have the touch of the psychic energy. Yeah. But clearly, it's a community that believes in spells and rituals and gree-gree.
And this is, I think, important that Black culture and Latino culture believe that magic lives side by side with us. That this is
not
magical
every person
realms.
In that culture, but it's a part of it.
It's part of it. They will actually write stories where a dead relative will come and sit at the table with them, and nobody at the table makes comment about it. It's that sense of a thinning between our world and the other world that makes for some fascinating fantasy work that you might want to think about in your own work if you're an artist, or to take a look at, there are movies that I do not see European movies like this, but there's a Japanese film called 13 Assassins. So Asian culture can be much the same way. It's very much like the Seven Samurai, where these 13 assassins are going to kill this guy who's protected by like 100 soldiers. And one of the 13 assassins is this wild man they picked up in the woods. And he's just knocking with a hammer or something. He's just knocking samurai left, right, and center. And at one point, he takes an arrow in the throat. Okay. Mm-hmm. And then at the end of the movie, he comes back and he's talking with people and he's jumping around all happy and everything. And the audiences are going, what? But if you realize that magical realism is a part of that world, you realize this was a forest creature. This was not a human. It never was a human being. That aspect of the magical is one of the reasons why we're talking about doing that women in STEM thing, but Black women in STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. We're talking about.
Have we mentioned that before? Right now?
No, okay. This we're going to be doing that soon. We're going to be talking about taking a springboard off of Hidden Figures. Black women navigating their path into the arts, but more importantly into the sciences and the techniques that they've been able to use. And the reason why I'm willing to consider STEAM with the inclusion of the arts is because I believe that in our culture, the arts are a closer part of how we feel about the universe is not separate from the mathematics of the universe. So I think that's a legitimate thing. Whereas, in white culture, those things are much more clearly defined.
Interesting. This is a working theory, but an interesting one. So yes, in terms of magic, let's move on then to Greedy Choke Puppy. Nalo Hopkinson will talk about actually how she came to write the story in the interview that's coming up later. But first, children, I'm going to read you a little bit because the poetry of this prose is such that I like to always read a little bit out loud.
Please do.
I'm going to do it with a very bad accent, though, so I apologize in advance for the bad accent. But I'm just gonna let it all go. This is my Viola Davis moment, okay? How you mean? Yes, Granny. You even know what a lagahu is? Don't you been frightening me with Jumbie's story from since I small? is a donkey with gold teeth, wearing a waistcoat with a pocket watch and 2 pair of tennis shoes on the hooves. Washe Kong, you mean I never teach you to say tennis shoes. Jackie smiled. Yes, Granny. So what the Lagahoo was doing in the pigeon peas patch? Just standing, looking at my window. Then he pull out he watch chain from out he waistcoat pocket, and he look at the time, and he put the watch back, and he bite off some pigeon peas from off one bush, and he walk away. Now that is Nalo Hopkinson's voice. You know, you can hear the grandmother, you can hear the music and her use of language. And I mean, she will talk about this later, but she wrote this when she was at Clarion, which, by the way, hint, hint, if any of you would like to go to Clarion, you too can write stories that will one day be taught in a seminal compilation of short fiction. But in any case, it's capturing the voice and folklore of the Caribbean in her work.
And notice that just as in Eve's Bayou is a self-contained world that is not about Black people interacting with white people, the work of Nalo Hopkinson, and to a greater degree, I think, the work of Nnedi Okorafor, is about Black people being Black people. In other words, most of her story, most of Nnedi's work would be exactly the same way if white people did not exist on the planet.
Right.
It's about, because Nigerians have their own culture, they have their own language and religions and everything.
So yeah, like just
Nalo,
an example, if any of you have read Nnedi's story, Benti, her novella that Tor put out a couple years ago and now has a sequel, her opposition at the beginning of the story is not black-white. It's because she's discriminated against because of the region she comes from, because of the customs in the region she comes from, the way her hair looks, and these sorts of things.
So Nalo's culture, the Caribbean culture, Jamaica and so forth, is half the way to being a fully fledged culture with its, you know, in the anthropological sense that Nigeria is. You know, there is a patois. There's English that is so mixed, and if you were to isolate them for a couple of centuries, they'd have a complete language and a complete culture in the sense that most anthropologists talk about it. But even so, she's able to talk about these people in reference to each other and in reference to their view of the universe, as opposed to most Black writers who are descended from slaves in the United States, who have to talk about Black culture either in relationship to white culture oppression or in terms of deep dysfunction and poverty caused by that interaction. I think that limits us. And what I ask that you do is go deeper than that. Go deeper than the black-white thing, or even the male-female fighting with each other thing, into real questions about what is it to be human. We hope that we're giving you enough of an overview with this course to have a foundation to do that.
So in terms of a greedy choke puppy, we even get an encyclopedia definition of the subject she's writing about, the folklore, the Sukoyo, if I'm saying that correctly, the Caribbean equivalent of the vampire myth. It's a bloodsucker, derives from the French verb sucer, to suck. Old hig is the Guyanese Creole expression for an old hag or a witch woman. The Sukoyon is usually an old, evil-tempered woman who removes her skin at night, hides it, and then changes into a ball of fire. See how she kind of misdirected us there, old woman?
Yes.
Anyway.
I forgot to, we didn't ask her how much reality there was in those encyclopedia or dictionary definitions.
Oh.
Because they sound so authentic.
Yeah, they do.
They really sound great.
But so I apologize for the spoilers. I mean, we put the homework up. I don't know what else to tell y'all except I said read the story. No, so there are huge spoiler possibilities in this, and in some ways you can't discuss this story without discussing the spoiler.
In some ways you can't.
Right?
But so do your homework, please, please.
So in any case, I mean, we're set up. The grandmother is pretty much baiting this granddaughter in that early conversation about with the Lagahoo, or whatever, because the granddaughter doesn't seem to have any personal knowledge, whatever, of these creatures, except what she's heard in story, right? And that's kind of a misdirection on the author's part. And the grandmother knows quite a bit about it.
An author is a magician.
Yeah.
If you have to become the magician's assistant and see what it looks like from the back of the stage, the mirrors and the distractions and the strings and so forth and so on, that then get a particular set of emotional responses from the audience. So you read the story the first time just to get the entertainment value of it. Okay, but then after that, read it again and look to see the way the wires are set up. You can see, how did they get this effect? How did they get that effect? For me, understanding the craft actually makes me appreciate the story more.
True. And it's an engaging story. Someone is stealing the life from babies and the spirit, and this poor grandmother. I'm just going to go ahead and say it. We find out by the end of the story that it was the granddaughter who was doing it, and she had to kill her own granddaughter. Cover your ears, it's too late now, you heard it. She had to kill her own granddaughter, and she had to kill her daughter before her. I mean, how horrible. So it's actually a tragedy. It's such a tragedy about, ultimately, loneliness. We were kind of misdirected toward the granddaughter's loneliness. She couldn't get a man, find a man, all that kind of thing that's sort of trivial when you get to the real meat of it, which is we have to now understand that this is an old woman who, because of this condition, was forced to kill both her daughter and her granddaughter.
And you brought up something, talking about idiot plots where people don't tell you something that if they told you straight up.
Nalo talks about that in the interview.
Okay, that's right. Yeah. We do. Yeah. Okay, good. So I won't go
repeat it here. We won't repeat it here. But you'll see what Nalo has to say about it. Okay. But in any case, those of you who don't know who she is, she's Jamaican, though she was raised in Guyana, Trinidad, and Canada. She got a World Fantasy Award for her novel Skin Folk. Samuel R. Delany is one of her favorite writers. It's magical realism. And for those of you who haven't heard us talk about this previously, it's a little late, but let me just explain. Magical realism, those are stories that take place in our world. That's the realism part. But there is an element of magic that is different, as opposed to fantasy, which often is not even our world. I mean, right? So, yeah.
It's not Jason and the Argonaut, Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger. No, Harry Potter is not magical realism. If there was a single magical thing or some small magical thing that happened within an otherwise completely realistic world, that's magical realism.
Right. Okay. And that's what she does. Why don't we, have a great idea?
Okay, let's roll the
tape. We have an interview with Nalo.
Okay, make sure to get it on the screen
so we can be sure about her work even better than we can tell you about her work. Sorry about that. So let's start officially then.
Yes, so welcome Nalo Hopkinson, the one and only.
Yay! Nalo, thank you for taking this time with us. We've just been having a lovely chat. So this is both an interview and a visit. But we're teaching this webinar, Afrofuturism, Dreams to Banish Nightmares. And, I so often think of this photo that your sweetie David Finley took. We'll show you the photo. Yeah, all of us at Howard University.
It was Duke, yeah?
I think it was Howard, is what everybody said.
Howard. Sorry, not an American.
I don't think I've ever been to Duke University.
Yeah, no. So, but there are people, I posted this on Twitter, and people actually recognize the mural. So they're like, oh, that's Howard. But in any case, I just, that we just finished our first Octavia segment last week, where we talked about her work a little bit. And of course, the Huntington has this beautiful exhibition of her work right now. So of course, there's a lot of talk about Octavia. So when you look at that photo, I was just wondering what it evokes for you. That time, when we had that Black to the Future road show.
Yes. I remember that, among other things, it was one of the first conferences on Black science fiction that I had encountered. And how wonderful it was to have all of us in the same space at the same time, because that's so rare.
Yes.
And there's a shared language, there's a shared joy. So when I look at that photograph, I just remember all of that. And I remember us going out for dinner together with Linda, the publicist from David, my publisher. Yeah.
Wow, you're good.
Yeah. I can't tell you what I had for breakfast yesterday.
Linda Duggins, right? Yes. See, I pulled out the last name. But
I don't remember it at all. It's all a blur.
I worked with her.
Oh, okay.
But in any case, it was a beautiful time. Probably a lot
of the way it felt in 1997 when I met Steve for the first time at Clark Atlanta. Just that sense of family,
Yes.
And for a while after Octavia passed, it felt like rather than this family and roadshow, we'd kind of all been scattered to the winds for a while, but coalescing again, interestingly enough.
Yes, starting with the Ferguson is the Future.
Right. Yes, in 2015, that was beautiful at Princeton.
Yes, just amazing, and so grateful to the people who organized it, because I had sort of after Atlanta, so not starting with Ferguson, excuse me.
It's
Spelman, the Octavia Butler celebration. That was so glorious, and have Steve to thank for that, because he took all us guests up into the reading room, and I don't think we came down for 3 hours.
That's true.
We were just sort of sharing. And after that, we all thought, we should be able to do this more often, but of course, that costs are all over the place. And I just sort of put it out into the universe. And the folks who organized Ferguson is the Future made it happen that time. So between you to thank for the Octavia Butler celebration that brought us together, and the folks at Princeton as well, it's celebratory when that happens. It's so joyous.
It is. I want to reach out and give you a hug right now.
I think that we might have a separate conversation and circulate a list and just kind of say, who would we like to meet with, like once a month, and just have a private Skype between those of us who are kind of family in that sense, to stay in touch and to offer support. There's no reason in the world. The technology exists. It doesn't even cost money. All it costs is, are we willing to do that and to connect that sense of the lonely artist. I think we could actually go from there into a discussion. The cost of art, the cost of walking this path, it has a cost on us as individuals. It has a cost financially. It has a cost in terms of our relationships. What has been your experience of being an artist as well as a scholar? But the artist path, what is the price that you've paid for that, Nalo?
I'm not sure I so much think of the price because it brings me so much.
Yeah.
However, one of the challenges I have personally is I have ADD and a couple of learning disorders. One learning disorder, ADD, and chronic pain disorder. I'm pretty sure that the pain disorder was latent in me until Clarion, until the science fiction workshop that I attended in 1998, I believe. And I think the stress of the sleepless nights and being critiqued every day and that kind of thing, I remember coming out of that with pains I didn't have.
Interesting.
And I would do it again in a hot second.
Wow.
Because it just was such a wonderful experience, and I learned so much, and I got to meet people like Chip, like Samuel R. Delaney, and I got to, I now have a cohort of fellow students that I go along with. So the cost, I think, is balanced. But for me with ADD, there's a constant stress because I have a really hard time writing regularly. I don't, in fact. And so I always feel like I'm not doing enough. And I have not been able to be as productive as the gold standard in our field, which is a novel a year.
Come on, now. Really? Is that realistic? Is that realistic for your best work?
If you're Charlie Strauss.
I mean, I know. I used to try to do that too. That's why I'm teaching now, so I don't have to try to do that anymore. Right?
Exactly.
So, but
there's a sense of I'm not doing enough. I haven't written in 3 weeks. I can't concentrate for more than 5 minutes when I do that feeling of always being behind. But I do think that it's only as solitary a thing as you let it be. I was lucky enough to grow up with my father as an artist, having a community of fellow writers. So there was this sense that they were all in it together.
Oh, good.
And there are, science fiction community, one thing it's good at doing is forming community groups. And I find if you want to isolate yourself, you can, but you don't have to.
Yes. Yes. And you're in short fiction. You're writing some short fiction. I know you published a short story collection last year, Falling in Love with Hominids.
Yes.
How does the short story form feel to you? I know I love it right now. I'm in love with short stories, but I don't know. Are you writing more short fiction, or are you still trying to work on a longer work?
When I started out, I was writing a lot of short fiction. It was my preferred form. And then, of course, found out that you can't really make a living writing short fiction.
Oh, right. Yes.
Do something else.
Right.
So I started practicing writing novels. And now I do that. And now I don't know how I feel about short fiction anymore. I don't think that I love it more than novels.
Okay.
I think it's about the same. But it's a form that I just love for itself. The way that a piece of short fiction is akin to a poem, where every word matters. It's this lovely little nugget of story that you get when enough of it works that it holds together.
Would you discuss your writing process? You know, how you approach it, how you approach those lovely little nuggets. You know, those little gems. Just, you know, if you talk to us, maybe you could describe your process in relationship to the story that our student just read, Greedy Choke Puppy.
Of course.
Oh, let me remind myself.
It's been a minute, I know.
Or, you know, make it general if you want to, but, you know, inspiration and process. And
well, there's a particular sadness in that story, and if our students haven't read it, too bad. Spoilers ahead, because you were supposed to read it by now. This grandmother had to kill her own granddaughter and her own daughter.
Yes, and people have pointed out to me that in a way I fell into one of the tropes of science fiction fantasy, which is for some reason people don't tell each other the thing they need to know so that they don't die.
Oh, come on. Where? What was that?
Grandmother could have told her at any point,
oh,
this is what you are.
Oh.
You're supposed to look after yourself. Instead, grandmother was hinting.
I see.
However, I wrote the story, and I think all stories have flaws, and I think that's one in that story. But the rest of the story, I think, is pretty good.
It's so natural for us, by the way, as writers. I would probably do the same exact thing. I'd be like, oh, yeah, you know about that story.
Well, it's not just science fiction. I mean, that also takes place in mysteries and in adventure stories. And I think that in life, how many of our problems in life come from incomplete communication? Yeah, that's very human. That's not dishonest.
That's the whole thing. That the engine of the good house was secrets, you know. But I mean, let's just say she had very good reasons as a character for not telling her. You just don't know what those reasons are. Your story was perfect.
I figured that Grandma didn't tell her that she knew because she knew she might have to kill her. She wanted to see what her morality was, what she was going to do with it. The implication being that there were those who learned not to be greedy choke puppies.
Well, as she
not greedy, but greedy means greed will choke the puppy. Is what that means in that patois. And so she was hoping that she could learn to control her appetite, maybe just sip a little bit from these babies without killing them. And when she realized that there was greed, I had no problem with that at all.
We didn't see it.
So please talk to us about the story.
Let's say it's that. So I wrote that story. I believe I wrote that story at Clarion at the Science Fiction Fantasy Writing Workshop. Yeah, and a couple of things. It's so hard to remember your inspiration, but one was the thing that became the title. It's actually a Jamaican saying, and it's Craven Choke Puppy, because Craven is how you say greedy in Jamaican.
Oh, interesting.
So I translated it so it would scan to more people. Right. And the other was the Sukuyan, which is a figure you get in various parts of the African diaspora, called different names. But the creature who turns into a ball of fire and, flies through the air and enters keyholes and drinks baby's blood. Yes. And I was always fascinated with her, in part because she's usually characterized as an old woman. And it's usually men killing her. And I think I wrote it in the stories, this idea that women often outlive men. So in a small village like that, you might have this woman who's lived long enough to accumulate some wealth, So in part, it's jealousy.
Yeah, and also just you mentioned that they were considered, if they're older, they're considered witches. And so there's the question of, are they living longer at the cost of men's lives? Was an implication, it seemed to me.
Yes, exactly. So I wanted to explore the idea of a creature like that having a moral code. And I also wanted to explore the idea of, I seem to remember vaguely that the grandma talks about how much she loved her husband and how much she loved sex with her husband.
Sure.
And you're not supposed to write that about old women. And I thought, no, it still happens.
So, I mean, in a lot of ways, it's very representative of your work in using folklore and mythology, and I would say underrepresented folklore, in the canon, so to speak. How does that feed you, and what is it that you would like to feed us as the writer?
Well, one of the things I get from folklore is that plot is difficult for me. So if you have a folktale, you already have a plot.
Oh, sure.
So when I first started doing this, I would sort of hang the story that I was writing on the bare bones plot. But then you have to do something different. You have to do a departure. And often what happens to me with folktales is that there's something that bugs me about the folktale. I was just teaching Diamonds and Toads to my own students, and the end of that story, the happy ending, is when the girl who has, jewels and coins falling from her lips, when she gets kicked out of her home, the prince comes by and sees her and asks why she's crying. And when she explains, it's right there in the story, he looks at all this money falling from her mouth and says, "Let's get married." You're a walking dowry.
Yeah, it's a walking dowry, right.
So for me, when I wrote the version of that story, I started with what happens after they get married, because I knew that was not a happily ever after.
No, it was not.
So often with folk tales, I'm picking on them. I'm saying, okay, so this old woman, I'm supposed to believe she's completely evil. Suppose she isn't. Or these folk tales, you're supposed to think of them as something of the past. What happens if I bring it into the present, and her granddaughter is actually, a scholar and a young woman, and so it's partly using folktales are these sort of burnished. They've been told over centuries and told and retold by different people, and everybody puts a little spin on it, and they become these sort of little perfect and imperfect gems. And I think folklore and fantasy is kind of what happens when you have ideas that are so complex and compressed and chunked that the only way you can tell them and be understood is to use fantasy, to use a fantastical meme.
Yes.
And I'm fascinated by that, like how much we understand. People who read my stories who don't know the tales still kind of know how folk tales work. So even if they don't recognize the story, it's not important.
Right.
Most of that kind of writing is based upon European folktales. Hans Christian Andersen and Brothers Grimm and so forth. Where did you grow up? And you were hearing these stories in childhood, clearly.
You were born in Jamaica.
Born in Jamaica, lived in Jamaica, Trinidad, Guyana, the U.S., moved to Canada when I was 16, stayed there until about 6 years ago. I was hearing some of them, but that was because of Miss Lou. Louise Bennett Coberly was a poet and storyteller in Jamaica, one of the people who fought to have Jamaican recognized as a language with its own grammar and not just bad English.
Okay.
And she had a program where she told stories. It was a children's program, so I listened to that. But my mother also worked in libraries, and so I would borrow the stories and read. And my father was a Latin teacher in high school and a writer, and so he had the European classics, and he had, I believe there was a collection of Japanese folk tales, and they were at home. They were on our shelves. And on the shelves of friends.
I've often thought that watching what's happening right now, the whole Afrofuturism movement finally seems to be taking off. there seem to be enough different writers that you can actually call it a movement, not just a few faces popping up here and there. So a number of things in my mind had to happen for that to be true. Black people as a group had to mature to the point that we were creating not just school teachers, not just scholars, not just scientists, but artists as well. And because it's going to be a blend of understanding of either the sciences and the arts. In your particular case, probably more the social sciences, the anthropological sciences, the science of what you're talking about, cultural sigils, cultural compressions of wisdom into these forms. Yeah, it is. Complex equivalence. Mm-hmm. There are all these stories that get passed from generation to generation, and they're embodied. Like the Bible is nothing more than a fantastic amount of compressed wisdom gathered over thousands of years. Black Americans were stripped of so much of that. They were told the mythologies of Europe rather than the mythologies of the diaspora. So people like you and Nnedi Okorafor, I think, are doing God's work, in terms of bringing these things back, saying this is what this part of it is. I'd like for you to comment on how much have you felt like an outsider in the sense that you were speaking of these other mythologies, this other way of looking at the world. To what degree has that been a positive or negative thing in your career?
Well, I don't know how to not feel like an outsider. I don't have anything against which to balance it. Partly because my family moved around so much. I was always entering school in a different country, halfway through with a cohort that had already established itself. And partly I think my brain's just wired that way. I really like being different. And so coming into science fiction, which I had been reading, since I was a girl in the public library on Tom Redcombe Avenue in Kingston, Jamaica, where my mother worked, coming into science fiction as a writer, I didn't know if I would get any understanding of what I was doing. But I had to take the chance because the stories were there.
Yes.
And found my first editor, Betsy Mitchell, who I love that woman.
Yes, I love her too.
And also found that science fiction community welcomed that first novel.
Yes.
And I realized, okay, we're actually a community that likes novelty. So for the people who weren't quite familiar, they liked that it was something new.
That
the problem has been
Brown Girl in the Ring.
Brown Girl in the Ring.
Brown Girl in the Ring. The problem has been that it used to be that I can get two kinds of critique. And people are writing reviews. I could have somebody who knew Caribbean culture but not necessarily science fiction, or I could have a review from somebody who knew science fiction but not Caribbean culture. There's beginning to be more people who can either intuit the one when they don't have the other, or who actually know both. Somebody like Lisa Allen Agostini, who's from Trinidad, who's a writer in her own right, is a favorite reviewer amongst Caribbean science fiction writers because she gets us. So for a while there was this hunger to have the stories understood in their entirety. A lot of people see Caribbean and think, ooh, it's calypso and it's lying in the sun on the beach smoking weed. And you don't know that there's so much more history.
Oh, wow.
So the stories get seen as, my stories get reviewed as being light summertime entertainment.
Wow.
There's nothing wrong with that, but that's really not what they are.
Interesting.
How do you see them? How do you see your work?
Wow. I'm starting to think about that a little bit more because I think it's kind of gotten away from me. But what's been happening recently is a lot of, it's almost recovery. I've been doing a lot of alternate history, fantasy set in the past, where I do the Sankofa thing. I go back and rewrite it in a way that feels to me healing.
What kind of things are you trying to heal?
I have a very keen sense of having no sense of who my ancestors were. When you talk to people from the continent, they can say, I'm Igbo, this is my family. that was taken from us. So I can only go back a couple generations. So a sense of lost history.
It doesn't drive me crazy. I am sanguine with it. But white people are often completely unaware of what was taken from us in that sense. That they literally will discuss being Irish or Jewish or German as if those are separate racial groups rather than different tribes. But black people are all just smushed together.
Yes.
And that sense of not knowing who your people were. Almost every white person I ever met knew where roughly in Europe their people came from, unless they were orphans.
Mm-hmm.
And almost no black people I know have ever known that. And that was what was so remarkable about Alex Haley's roots. Is for all practical purposes, he was the first black man who ever traced it back. And you'll notice how they tried to destroy him.
Yes.
How they tried to attack his scholarship. He had rooms full of research that he'd done. But it seemed to be important to destroy our sense of who we are. You have worked hard to reclaim that. Why has it been important to you?
It's an odd thing because I'm not especially an active family person. I don't have children, have an extended family that I don't see very often. I'm in touch with them from time to time, love them, but I don't see them very often. And yet, it still feels important to me. It feels important, for instance, to show that we did fight back. I've heard of young black children being laughed at by their peers because they were slaves, and the kids assuming it's because we didn't fight back. Right. We fight back all the time, constantly, in big ways and small. So I like showing that. I like showing the story I just finished. The fighting back worked, and it's set in roughly 18th century in a maroon community that has held together through their own strength and formed a creolized community that functions. It's not perfect. It has its own appearances, but there's just something about that we can do this too. We are human, in fact, imagine. And so one of the things I really enjoyed doing in that book was there's a fight. It's a joda, it's a capoeira. So it's a staged fight between a young girl and a grown man who's a master of this form. Because they know war is coming, they're starting to practice in earnest. And I wanted her to win. And I didn't want her to win through any magical means. I wanted her to win through using her mind to use her body the way her body could. And so I have this scene where this little girl, for just long enough to throw him, to surprise him, wins this fight. Cool. And eventually he wins through strength, but then he holds her up and says, look at this girl. She's used everything she had in her brain, and she took me down. And there was just something really wonderful about that for me, giving a child agency through what they have.
Yes.
Yes.
Good for you.
I am giving you a standing ovation and applauding. I could not agree more. It's so much of in the political climate, and I just had to walk away from Twitter. There are a lot of hashtags. This poor young man, Jordan Edwards, shot in Texas, is bringing back Tamir Rice, which is bringing back Trayvon. I mean, it's just like, and I have a son who's 13.
Yes, exactly. I think about you too often because of your son.
I recently went to pick him up at the park, and my worst nightmare seemed to be in front of my eyes that he was with a huddle of kids talking to two police officers, and I'm like, oh my God. And but anyway, it was nothing. He was just a bystander being curious, but that boom, 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 boom of my heart is going into my fiction. And I'm wondering if you're feeling a similar response to mounting political pressures, social pressures, emotional pressures. There's life, and then there's life post-election,
Mm-hmm. Yes, particularly as somebody who is not American, can't vote, came here from Canada.
Right.
Can't exactly go back there.
You're running the wrong way, honey.
You have to open a shop to go to. Yes, the choice in the wrong direction. And yet, looking around in this beautiful, beautiful land, I'm thinking, no, I I don't want to go back. I want change to happen.
You want to fight here.
Yeah. And because I mean, my sweetie said to me, like, anywhere we go, we're going to have to fight. That's the nature of, you know, who we are as Black people. So might as well be here. And I haven't forgotten it. Oh, how was it driving? I was writing a story for Jonathan Strawn for an anthology called Drowned Worlds that is about rising sea levels. And this was before the election, but yet I started researching what's going to happen to the Caribbean as the waters rise. And the more I researched, the sadder I got. Right. Because this is my home region. Wherever I have lived, Caribbean is my home region. So I contacted Jonathan and said, you know, I don't know. The story it's just really sad. And he said, yeah, I know, and I'm looking forward to what you write. So I had to finish it. And what I finally thought was, I'm Jamaican. A lot of us were Congo people. We fighters. And what do Jamaicans do? They get mad. They get angry. And I started writing the story from anger. And that's when I could finish it. And what I got was one of the strangest pieces I have ever written.
Where can our students find this story?
It's in Drowned Worlds. And I believe it's also in Falling in Love with Hominids, my new short story collection.
Okay, great.
How do you see the difference in race relations in the United States and Canada?
Particularly Blackness?
Yes.
It's hard to put it into words, but Blackness is attacked pretty much everywhere in the world. In the US, there's a particular flavor of centuries of being under siege that is mind-boggling. And, you know, I have great faith in us because we're human. We will find ways to survive. And we do, and we have. But what happens to Black people here and what has been happening historically and the fact that it's so ground in is worse than a crime. Not to say it isn't happening in other places, it absolutely is. But there's something about the American flavor of it that is uniquely horrible.
Can you describe it in any way? Can you, as an artist, can you find an analogy, anything to help us understand why it feels that way to you? What was it you're seeing or feeling?
I'm living in Riverside now in a working class area with a lot of people who are Black and Mexican. Riverside has got a lot of diversity. And what I'm seeing is people who have not been allowed to know that there is more.
Yes. So
I was walking home one day and a Black guy stopped me and said, are you so-and-so? I said, no, I'm not. I'm from Canada. And he it had not occurred to him that there would be Black people in Canada. And I've encountered that before.
Yeah, okay.
But it's also in the way we speak. My difference is marked by the way I speak. Mm-hmm. And I can see people not quite recognizing it, but there's something, they know there's difference there. A sense of worldliness, a sense of being a citizen of the world, even if you don't travel much, but knowing that there's a bigger world out there and that there are Black people everywhere. That's what I said to this guy. No, there's Black people in Finland.
That was very meaningful. Before I had traveled, my mother told me, people with Black and brown skin are the majority in the world, just to sort of give me that reality check. So exactly what you're about to experience, and you're going to experience a lot, just remember, the word minority is a lie. And, whatever, she didn't say it that way, but that's what, and it really did help expand my mind. And then you're right, travel helps. As Americans, we tend not to think about the rest of the world, period. But when you've been exposed to so many generations of subjugation and poverty in a lot of cases, what opportunities do you have to get out and see the world, right? Or even dream to get out and see the world. So you're right, it would be much worse, just not even being aware that there's more. Yes. And that's a key line in a short story I just wrote. There is more than this. There is more than this.
Yes, there is. And so one of the things I'm beginning to feel is my duty is I grew up in a family that was not wealthy, particularly at all, but we were, let's say, middle class or intelligentsia. My dad was an artist, my mother worked in libraries. But having that middle class background and growing up in places where we were mostly in the majority, even though there was lots of racism, meant that if I was put into a position of privilege, I knew what to do when I got there.
Right.
And I sort of feel that I have to find a way to teach that comfort. And I don't know how.
Does this inform your writing?
I believe so. For one thing, like the both of you, I will quite happily drop a reference to Greek mythology beside one to, quantum physics beside one to Granny Nanny of the Maroons in Jamaica. And they all go together in my head because I have access to them all. They are my right.
Right.
Once again, I think that you're doing, God's work in the sense that human beings didn't just create story. Story also created humanity. That, if you have a bunch of Polaroids of different facts, it doesn't mean anything. But if I pick them up and tell you a story of this scene and then this scene, now there is emotion and now it has meaning. And just, the struggle is worth it. That not just for your career, but for the people who will stand on your shoulders and my shoulders and T's shoulders and the people who are listening to this right now, that by you sharing with us your struggles, you're letting them know that it's all right for them to dream. And
very much so.
I wanted to thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
So much. And we will have other conversations on other subjects. But right now, just thank you for your time, and we're going to let you go.
Thank you.
All right.
You have a great
Take care, dear. We love you.
Love you too. I love that Skype idea.
Good. Yeah,
absolutely. We will follow up on that. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
So there we are. Hopkinson. Welcome back, everybody. Well, we have reached the end of another class. I've already started putting the homework up on the syllabus website, so if you're getting behind, maybe you can keep up this time a little bit better. You'll be reading a short story by me this time.
Yay!
And the one I've chosen is Summer. It's from my, it's about the
Oh.
I mean, no, not the, but anyway, it's not evil. Yeah, so my short story Summer, the link is up on the website.
Of course it's evil. She wrote it.
Also, we've managed to skip like one of the earliest pieces of Afrofuturistic film, which is John Sayles' The Brother from Another Planet, starring Joe Morton. So we'll ask you to watch that if you haven't seen it already. I had not seen it until very recently, the past couple years. So some of you might have missed that one.
I saw it in the theaters.
Oh, in the theaters.
Yes, but it's been years. And so I'll enjoy watching it again.
Bit of trivia, he spent his MacArthur Genius Grant to make that film. That was what he chose to do with that money. So watch it and let's see what we think about it. And I haven't chosen a musical artist, but that will go up soon. And we'll have an interview with graphic artist John Jennings, who is also brilliant. You might want to check out some of his artwork online. Maybe I can find some links, like his website. I'll put that up so you can check out his artwork. And he just did the graphic novel adaptation of Octavia Butler's Kindred with Damien Duffy. So if you don't have that, we didn't ask you to buy it, but you might want to just go ahead and buy it just for fun and read that before the John Jennings interview.
Indeed you might.
But we'll see you guys next week.
Next week. Take care. We love you very much. And just hope that those of you who are writing, and those of you who are making movies are thinking about that, and those of you who are
learning,
the audience for this wonderful art that the children of the African diaspora are creating, understand how important you are. Without you, we could not exist. Take care. We'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.